Well, I want to welcome Chris. Thank you for coming on and having a chat with me during OCD Awareness Week.
Thank you. Happy, or I should say, Clear and Mindfulness World Mental Health Day. But it's great to be on.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So I wanted to pick your brain about like being a parent with a child with OCD, because I get a lot of questions, and it would be great to get your perspective on that. So in
Sure.
general, we'll just talk about the obvious thing. If someone was just newly diagnosed, what would be the first steps that you would take as a parent?
I think for us, and I would just recommend doing as much research as possible. And it's not just scouring, Google, but it's getting a couple of OCD books, talk back to OCD, or when a child, or when a family member has OCD, kind of books that are sort of like textbooks, but are like a self-help. This is how the process works, because it really gives you not only the idea of how therapy works, but also how the brain works. You kind of you need to get educated on OCD more than just your child and other things, and what to be aware of. And that way, and the reason for that is so I think you can help your kid the best, but also so that you can have a relationship with a therapist and understand how the world around the kid is gonna be affected, and how your life is gonna be affected. So, number one thing is educate. And because you're kind of, if your child is been diagnosed, and hopefully they have a therapist, and, make that the number one priority. The therapy appointments are not to be missed. And whatever homework the therapist gives you, or whatever you work on during therapy, make that the number one priority to work on during the week.
Yeah, I think those are good points, because I think some parents, not all parents, but some parents do have the whole let the professional handle this mentality, maybe because they're nervous. They don't want to mess anything up, or they don't understand it. And I think it's a good thing to convey. You're the expert in your child. You may not be an expert at OCD right now, but your kid, and you're with them 24/7. So study it. Like my child was just diagnosed with celiac disease, and I knew nothing about gluten-free, celiac, like 3 days ago. And now I feel like I'm like a mini expert, It's like, you just have to like bury your head in that. And those are two great books that you mentioned, Talking Back to OCD, and what's the title?
When a Family Member Has OCD.
Yeah, that's an excellent one too.
Yeah, John's book is great. These are kind of things that we learned, and we were lucky that sometimes somebody else would say something, and we'd be like, "Oh, we have permission to do that. That's great." So understand that you will not be amazing from day one, and then it takes time, and there's a lot of bumps in the road. But that the best advice I think our therapist gave us initially was like, nothing else takes priority over mental health and OCD. And it was like, oh, you mean we have permission not to do play dates and cancel homework? And she's like, if homework can't be done and ERP can be done, ERP. And, it was like just having somebody else give, there's like that type of feedback was like a big weight on their shoulders, because you're trying to do everything.
Yeah.
It's hard.
Yeah. And I think making it a priority and realizing that is the number one priority, no matter what's going on, is important. So I get a lot of questions about siblings. A lot of parents will email me, or in the private Facebook group, they'll always talk about, my other child, I feel so bad for them. They are the punching bag. Either they're the punch, there's three things that I see happen. They're either the punching bag. So, if I have OCD and I'm really stressed and you're my sister, you're getting hit first for sure. Or two, you're a bag of germs. And so you're contaminated. And so there's a lot of pain, I think, that goes around with, I can't touch you, or the things that you touched.
Yeah.
And then three, which is completely unrelated to the other two, is you're my partner in crime. So mom and dad aren't going to do my compulsions, but you've got my back, right? So how do you help with all that? Because I know you have two girls, so yes. I'm sure you live this.
Yeah, I mean, I think clearly you got to help the kid with OCD first, but it also, we as a family believe that a family that fights OCD together beats OCD together. So it's as important as possible to me to educate the siblings and caregivers and grandparents as much as possible on how OCD needs to be treated. And in the same way you would, tell a kid, tell a babysitter, your baby needs to be fed at 7 o'clock and put to bed at 9 o'clock. You almost kind of have to do that with a sibling. This is what the new rules are. This is what you have to try to avoid. And to try to get the sibling on board to be aware of what OCD is, because they need to know obsessions and compulsions and issues. And that will cause friction, because there are a lot of times when the sibling with OCD does not want anybody to know and is scared to know. And, you're younger, or, the child should not be in charge. The sibling should not be in charge of the therapy. But, the other siblings need to understand what's going on, what to look out for, what to watch for. And we were lucky that our youngest is super vocal, and she was like, I'm going to help, and there's nothing you could do about it. So we had that, a little opposite problem where we had to say, no, you had to back away a little bit. But she's been super helpful, and she is a trigger, and it is very, very hard. There's no easy way around saying, like, to my daughter Charlotte that sorry, tonight your sister's sleeping in your bed. And she's like, okay, I don't know how to get a say in this. This is not fair. But you have to try to give the other thing I would say is try to give as equal time as you can to the other siblings. OCD will take over your life, take over your family, and it tends to be this, I've heard people call it a smart disease because it goes after the things you care about. So if you're really into sleep, suddenly a sleep issue will come up. If you love eating out, sometimes there'll be problems with restaurants, and you have to try to give that other sibling as much as possible. Time away, special time, alone time with you. One, that shows OCD it's not boss, but two, it just gives you time and gives your other sibling time to feel like, they matter as well, which they do.
Yeah. And I think when you're in a storm and you're trying to find some peace and calm, you can forget, just to, hey, let me take my other child out, for a quick bite to eat or something, and give them that one-on-one time. So.
Oh yeah, and I say all that advice knowing that the first 6 weeks that my daughter was diagnosed with OCD, Charlotte's go-to thing was sit in front of the TV and watch whatever you want. Like, that's what we did. So we didn't do it right, but we had to learn from it. But that's we eventually realized, and she said, like, hey, help me out here, and kind of like got us in line.
Yeah. And, I think it's a messy process, and it doesn't matter whether you know what to do or what not to do, or even myself as a professional. I mess up with my son's OCD all the time. Sometimes I'll accommodate before I even realize I'm accommodating, or I'll forget my other kids until they have a really big front burner issue. And then I'm like, oh gosh, I can't, I got to spread it all out. Yeah. So yeah, we're all human. We're going to mess up. I think it's just knowing, okay, I have the intention of doing this. And then, if I do it 50% of the time, 30% of the time, I'm doing good.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
So another thing that I hear a lot about often is my family doesn't get this either, or my friends don't get it. So either they get hurtful comments like, well, we all have a little bit of OCD, right? Or, maybe if you didn't baby her so much, she wouldn't be so afraid of the world. I mean, I could go on and on. I'm sure you've heard them too.
All the excuses. Again, it's trusting yourself and knowing and trusting the diagnosis and saying, what you see every day, no matter what. And then the advice, there's a bit of education that you can try to do. So every time someone says, and we have these conversations at home, so-and-so said, I'm so OCD, teachers say it all the time. And I try to explain to my daughters that that's a chance to educate, or to subtly talk about and teach them what it is and what it isn't. And then with family members, I'm going to again refer to that book, When a Family Member Has OCD, because he does have strategies to kind of educate. But you have to feel like, how can you explain it to them in as best way as you can, whether it's through a book, like a children's book. My daughter read like some of these children's books too. My grandparents, this is what I have. I don't think they still understand. Um, but at the end of the day, you are just in charge of their therapy. So if there's a family member that doesn't get it, ignore them. That's my personal advice. Like that, they don't know your kid, and so forget them. They're not. Give no credence to it. At the same time, find a group or community, whether it's start a local support group, which is exactly what we did, because we quickly realized that there are things in OCD therapy that we couldn't tell our parents, our other friends or family members. They just wouldn't understand some of the things that you're required to do. What do you mean it's pouring rain out and you're standing in front of the tree that your daughter's scared? That doesn't make sense. Well, that's part of what the therapy is, so that's what we got to do. So if you can find a way and an outlet that allows you to talk about what's going on with OCD with other parents, that will certainly help not only you mentally, but also feel confident in the treatment that you're doing.
Yeah. And I think you're not going to educate everybody. So
No.
I love that. It's accepting and trusting your gut and the professionals that you connect with, hopefully, or whatever you've read, and realizing that not everyone's going to understand it, and letting that go, because
it's a conversation that can take a long time, not over, not just one and done.
Yeah.
The other day, my youngest was saying, when we go to Grammy's house, they like accommodate Vanessa all the time, and they tell her just to get over it. That's still after 5 years of conversations about how things need to be done. So, it's still an ongoing process.
Yeah. And it might be for a lot of people. The last thing I wanted to cover is school. School is tricky for a lot of people. I know with my own son, he normally flies below the radar. People don't realize that he's having a problem. And so I try to be proactive at the beginning of the school year and just say, hey, I don't really give him his diagnosis per se, but I'll say he's got some intrusive thoughts about this, and I'll go through it just to warn them in the beginning, so that if he starts to hit a bump before I can even go in and meet with the teacher, she has a heads up. What do you do to help your kids or your child prepare for school struggles?
What we've done in the past, when she was really young in elementary school, she actually would write a letter and explain it. And then it's almost like day one, you go in and meet the teacher and say, hey, by the way, we need to meet with you. So we realized that it was important to get that relationship with the school, either administrator or teacher. And all teachers that we've encountered want to help. But so you kind of give them the things to look out for. Vanessa would generally try to create some kind of system with the teacher, whether it was like, if I'm having an anxiety thing, I'll raise my hand, I'll do this. And if the teacher noticed, then she could go take a breath, and then she would go, talk to the vice principal or go outside in 5 minutes, so that she wasn't necessarily disrupting class. Because what we're trying to be conscious of is that, there's 30 other kids in the class, everybody's issue. Teachers are trying to get through so many things in a day. But if they can just be aware of what Vanessa's dealing with, and but most important is establishing that line of communication, so that if something happens in school, somebody can email you so you can know what to work on and talk about. And that's where we are now. Now that she's older and parents are more like, you're not involved in the school as much. It's more about establishing, we meet with the teachers. And so we've gotten emails, like we're going to be watching Schindler's List later on in the year. So we know that's going to be a big trigger for Vanessa. It's a scary movie, scary topic. So we're going to start, that's a good tell for us, because we can start watching it and prepare her for it. And that's really, I think, the key thing about just letting the schools know this is the issue, and then also advocating for whatever you think you need.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times parents are afraid to throw out the diagnosis. They don't want it in the school system. They don't want it on the record. There's a lot of worry about labeling their kids. And I always feel like it's better. There's more pros than cons. It's better for them to all know what they're dealing with, how to help your child. They spend a lot of time there. And to have that open communication is huge.
Yeah, and I this is going to be a generalization, but it was very funny at the beginning. Vanessa didn't want to tell anybody. And then when she started to be more comfortable with it, she would tell her friends, like, oh, I'm going to therapy today. And I kid you not, half the kids were like, oh, what do you see a therapist for? I see a therapist for this. And it was suddenly like, Oh, okay. You have anxiety, you're going for family issues, right? You have to see a specialist because you need speech therapy, and it's suddenly like, oh, so we're all kind of doing this, okay?
Yeah.
And was like, oh, everybody's got something.
Yeah. And I think that it's freeing to know that like it's normal. People have struggles. We all have things that we're working on. So that's what I always tell kids. I'm like, I'm probably seeing your classmates. And sometimes I know that I actually am, and I'm like, there's not a lot of you in your class that are coming to see a therapist. Just a hunch, and there probably are.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So lastly, what would be, if you were to talk to a family that is just dealing with a struggle, what would be your best advice if you had to kind of sum it
up? That it can and will get better. And that I think you have to, there's a lot of fear and worry and, oh my, it's a lot of stress at the beginning. And I'm not saying it's going to go easily or it's not going to be easy, but there is, that your child can get better, and know that no matter the fact that and you're taking steps to help them is going to eventually end up being in a better place. I'm not going to say they're ever going to be OCD free or worry free. New issues will pop up, but they will get in a better place, and that the place you're in now is just a blip on the radar.
Yeah. And I think that's important to hear, because when you're in the thick of it, you kind of feel like you're never going to get your head above water.
Yeah, it's hard to have perspective when you feel like everything's crashing in on you, and you come home and your kid's monopolizing your life and doing all these rituals, or acting out or whatever, and it's hard to be like, okay, wait a minute, there will be a day when this is not the problem.
Yeah.
And
and even when you hit those happen. Yeah, and I think even when you hit those bumps, you go back to all those skills that you built. And so I'll tell parents, you might hit a bump, but it's not like you're going all the way back. When my son hits a bump, it's like, okay, well, do you want to do exposure on that? Should we start exposures weekly? And he's immediately knowing exactly what language to use and to lean into it. And we don't have to do all that. Like that road has already been built. We just have to jump back on.
Right. So, exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for coming on and sharing this information. These are all the top questions I get. So this is perfect.
Great. I hope it helps.
It does. All right. Take care.
Have a great OCD week.
Yeah, you too.